Hello, welcome to EPG Pathshala. Today we are going to learn module 4, that is communication process. After learning this unit, you will be able to understand the principles of communication, identify the components of communication, explain the process of communication, illustrate with examples the modes of communication, understand the theories of communication. So, let's begin with these objectives in mind. Communication is a two-way process. What is this communication exactly? When we exchange ideas, thoughts, information, intentions, feelings, emotions with any other individual or any other group, it is called communication. Communication may be verbal or non-verbal. It may be through any medium. It may be through the written medium, through the verbal medium, through the electromagnetic medium, your facial expressions, your gestures, all can communicate. That is, it gives some message which the other person understands, interprets in his own or her own way. Thus begins the communication cycle. So, today let us see what are the principles of communication first. There are many different channels through which we give and receive information. There are elementary principles which we all need to follow to be effective communicators. Whether it is an informal talk like speaking to a colleague or a formal mode of communication like addressing a conference or a meeting, writing a newsletter, article or formal report, the following basic principles apply. The first principle is clarity. Every communication must have clarity. A message that leaves the reader scratching his head is a failed message. Clarity springs from knowledge of the message. What you want to say, the method, how you want to say it, and the medium, what format you want to say it in. A lack of mindfulness in any one of these components affects the effectiveness of the message. The second principle is conciseness. Communication is founded on the principles of conciseness. This applies not just to the length of your message, but also its contents. Try to use short sentences and short words. Avoid jargon and words that send the reader to the dictionary. So, one's communication has to be concise and clear. The third principle is objectivity. Any communication must always have a purpose. This purpose must be apparent to anyone who glances through your message. Before you put a single word to paper, ask yourself, what am I trying to achieve with this message? This will help you to stay on course through the message creation process and effect a remarkable improvement in the message efficacy. The fourth principle is consistency. All communication must have consistency of tone, voice, and content. Imagine that you are reading a book that starts with a humorous satire on one page, a serious explanation on another, a serious medieval romance halfway through, and finally finishing as a supernatural comedy. Such a book will alienate the readers and leave them confused and even angry. Although you can stray from the set tone from time to time, a few humorous jokes can help lighten the mood. The overall theme must remain consistent. So, the tone of the book or the text that you want to communicate has to be consistent. The next principle is completeness. Each message must have a clear and logical conclusion. The receiver shouldn't be left wondering if there is more to come. The message must be self-sufficient, that is, it must hold good on its own without support from other messages. This is particularly apt for blog posts which often end abruptly and leave the readers scratching their heads. Many times while writing blogs, the individuals who do so leave them incomplete and then get on to some other work. Therefore, it is very important that there is completeness in whatever you do. Any message that you want to deliver has to be complete in itself. Relevancy. This is the next principle of communication. Every message sent out must be contextually cohesive with previous and future messages. The message must also be relevant and related. The next principle is audience knowledge. Your message must have a thorough understanding of your primary audience. Everything else, clarity, completeness, objectivity, results from your knowledge of your audience. Your message must reflect the age, education level, aims and objectives of your audience. This is possible only if you thoroughly know your receivers and can see things from their perspective, from their point of view. Therefore, audience knowledge is very important for the communication process. And next subtopic is components of communication. The main components of communication are as follows: is context. Any message, whether it is oral or written, begins with a context. Context may be a place, culture or organization. Every organization, culture and country communicates information in its own way. Context also includes external or internal stimuli. Meetings, letters, memos, telephone calls, fax, notes, emails and even a casual conversation are external stimuli. This external stimulus motivates you to respond, which may be oral or written. Internal stimuli includes opinions, attitudes, likes, dislikes, emotions, experience, education and confidence. The second component is the sender or encoder. An encoder is a person who sends the message. A sender makes use of symbols, they may be words or graphic or even visual aids to convey the message and produce the required response. The sender may be an individual, a group or an organization. The sender's views, background, approach, skills, competencies and knowledge have a great impact on the message. The receiver interprets a message depending on the verbal and non-verbal symbols chosen by the sender. The next component of communication is the message itself. Message is the information that is exchanged between the sender and the receiver. It is the key idea that the sender wants to communicate. Communication process begins with deciding about the message to be conveyed. It must be ensured that the main objective of the message is clear. The first task is to decide what you want to communicate and what would be the content of your message, what the main points of your message are, and what are the information to include. While writing the message, the encoder should keep in mind all aspects of context and the receiver, how he will interpret the message. Messages can be intentional or unintentional. Many times, very unintentionally also, we do give many messages through our non-verbal communication. It may be through your gestures, through your emotions, through your expressions, through your eyes, through your face reading, through your body language. Unintentionally, many messages are sent through. The next component of communication is medium. Medium is a means used to exchange or transmit the message. The sender must choose an appropriate medium for transmitting the message, else the message might not be conveyed to the desired recipients. The choice of appropriate medium of communication is essential for making the message effective and ensuring that it is correctly interpreted by the recipient. For instance, a written medium would be more appropriate when a message has to be conveyed to a small group of people, while an oral medium is chosen when immediate feedback is required from the recipient. The receiver is the person who interprets the message. She is a person for whom the message is intended, aimed and targeted. The degree to which the decoder understands the message is dependent upon various factors such as knowledge of the recipient, his perception, opinion, attitude, and personality. The receiver is also influenced by the context, internal and external stimuli. The next component of communication is feedback. Feedback is the response or reaction of the receiver to a message. Feedback may be a written or oral message. It may be an action or simply silence. Feedback helps the sender to know the efficacy of his or her message. It helps the sender in confirming the correct interpretation of message by the decoder. Thus, we have studied all components of communication. Now, we come to the process of communication. The process of communication is a sequence of events in which a sender transmits a message to a recipient. The message can be verbal or non-verbal. There are several steps in the process: encoding, medium of transmission, decoding, and feedback again. The necessary components that need to be present for the process of communication to occur include the sender, the recipient, the message. In order for effective communication to take place, it is vital that the message is easily understood. The first step in the process of communication is called encoding. This is when the message is transformed from a thought in someone's mind to a form that can be understood by others. The message can be written down, spoken, or it can even take a non-verbal or wordless form such as gestures or a picture. Once the message has been encoded, it should be in the form that is ready to be received and understood. The second step in the process of communication is transmitting. After the message has been prepared for transmission, it needs to be sent. This part of the process of communication is called the medium of transmission. In this step, the sender selects the best method for sending the message and transmits it. For example, a written message may take the form of email or a business report that is printed out and hand delivered. A verbal message may be telephone conversation or a speech given before an audience. A non-verbal message such as a picture may be transmitted by posting it onto the internet or hanging it in a museum. The next step in the process of communication is decoding. Once the message has been transmitted, the next step in the process of communication requires decoding. This occurs once the recipient gets the message, examines and interprets it using prior knowledge and experience. In this manner, the recipient develops an understanding of the meaning of the message, which is partially based on his or her own background. And finally, feedback is the last part of the process, where the recipient responds to the message, thereby indicating understanding. Now, there are various modes of communication. Let us see one after the other. The interpersonal mode. The interpersonal mode is characterized by active negotiation of meaning among individuals. Participants observe and monitor one another to see how their meaning and intentions are being communicated. Adjustments and clarifications can be made accordingly. As a result, there is a higher probability of ultimately achieving the goal of successful communication in this mode than in the other two modes. The interpersonal mode is most obvious in convocation, but both the interpersonal and negotiated dimensions can be realized through reading and writing, such as the exchange of personal letters or electronic mail messages. Examples of interpersonal mode are exchange information via letters, email, video mails, conversation or interviews on familiar topics such as school events, weekend activities, memorable experiences and family life. One may express and compare opinions and preferences about information gathered regarding events, experiences and other school subjects. When we clarify meanings, that is paraphrasing or questioning, we are using the interpersonal mode. When we give and follow directions, instructions and requests, for example, installing software or learning some dance steps, it is again interpersonal mode. Even when we demonstrate the ability to acquire goods, services or information, for example, while using public transportation, while making a hotel reservation, while buying food, we are using the interpersonal mode of communication. The second mode of communication is the interpretative mode. The interpretative mode is focused on the appropriate cultural interpretation of meanings that occur in written and spoken form, where there is no recourse to the active negotiation of meaning with the writer or the speaker. Such instances of one-way reading or listening, which include the cultural interpretation of texts, oral or written, must be distinguished from the notion of reading and listening comprehension, where the term could refer to understanding a text with an American mindset. Put another way, interpretation differs from comprehension in that the former implies the ability to read or listen between the lines. Since the interpretive mode does not allow for active negotiation between the reader and the writer or the listener and the speaker, it requires a much more profound knowledge of culture from the outset. The more one knows about the other language and culture, the greater the chances of creating the appropriate cultural interpretations of a written or spoken text. It must be noted, however, that cultural literacy and the ability to read or listen between the lines are developed over time and through exposure to the language and culture. Examples of interpretive mode are following directions, instructions and requests. For example, recipes, travel directions, prompts on ATMs, etc. Use listening and reading strategies, for example, skimming, scanning, to determine main ideas and purpose. When we are doing this, we are into the interpretive mode of communication. The next is the presentational mode. The presentational mode refers to the creation of messages in a manner that facilitates interpretation by members of other cultures where no direct opportunity for active negotiation of meaning between members of the two cultures exists. Examples of the one-way writing and speaking require a substantial knowledge of language and culture from the outset. Since the goal is to make sure that members of the other culture, the audience, will be successful in reading and listening between the lines. Examples of presentational mode: when we summarize information from authentic language materials and artifacts, for example, TV programs, articles from youth magazines, internet, videos, currency, and give personal reactions, it is called presentational mode. When we use information acquired from target language sources to solve everyday problems and situations, for example, using a newspaper to make plans to see a movie, perusing a catalog to shop for a birthday gift, watching a weather forecast to help plan an activity, we are using the presentational mode. When we create and present a narrative, for example, current events, personal experiences, school happenings, we are using the presentational mode. When we present differences in products and practices, for example, sports, celebrations, school life found in the target culture, we are using the presentational mode. When we apply age-appropriate writing process strategies in the pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, publishing, we are using the presentational mode. Now, let us learn about theories of communication. There are many theories of communication. Here, we have tried to present a select few. The study of communication and mass media has led to the formulation of many theories, structural theories as well as functional theories. These theories believe that social structures are real and function in ways that can be observed objectively. Cognitive and behavioral theories tend to focus on psychology of individuals. Interactionist theories view social life as a process of interaction. Interpretive theories uncover the way people actually understand their own experience, and critical theories are concerned with the conflict of interests in society and the way communication perpetuates domination of one group over another. Now, let us see some of these theories one at a time. The communication accommodation theory elaborates the human tendency to adjust their behavior while interacting. The reason behind this behavior is explained as to control the social differences between the people interacting. People accommodate their communication activities to get approval and to set a positive image with whom they interact. The environment in which they are interacting also affects the communication behavior. There are two types of accommodation process explained in this theory. The two processes usually are dependent on the characteristics of the people interacting. One is the convergence, which is a process where people tend to adapt the other person's communication characteristics to reduce the social differences. This process is called convergence. The next process is divergence, which contradicts the method of adaptation, and in this context the individual emphasizes on the social differences and non-verbal differences between the people interacting. So, these are the two types of accommodation process explained in the communication accommodation theory. The second theory is cross-cultural communication theory, which refers to the communication between people who have differences in any one of the following: styles of working, age, nationality, ethnicity, race, gender, sexual orientation, etc. Cross-cultural communication can also refer to the attempts that are made to exchange, negotiate and mediate cultural differences by means of language, gestures and body language. It is how people belonging to different cultures communicate with each other. By accepting people and their differences and acknowledging that we don't know everything makes us open up to people and their differences results in the use of contextual information for better understanding. Seeking feedback and taking risks to open up channels of communication and being responsible for our feelings and actions goes a long way in ensuring that miscommunication is mitigated. Cross-cultural communication creates a feeling of trust and enables cooperation. The focus is on providing the right response rather than providing the right message. The next theory is the cultivation theory. The cultivation theory argues that the media generally presents an image of the world that does not reflect reality. Television images are an exaggeration or fantasy of what actually exists. There are a disproportionate number of handsome gentlemen, beautiful women, crime, wealth and violence in media. As a result, people end up perceiving the real world in a distorted manner and viewing actuality through a television perspective. Television offers a plethora of ideas and conceptions on a variety of social and cultural dynamics like race, gender, sexuality, etc. Over a period of time, a fixed image of various groups of people is formed and viewers start to absorb these ideas, which they often use as a map to navigate through life. This constant exposure to the media content cultivates specific values, beliefs, attitudes and desires in people. These newly perceived notions shape their perceptions of the world and they ultimately influence how others perceive them. People therefore end up unconsciously shaping their thought processes and behavior based on what they consume. Cultivation theory research views television as a system of messages and tries to understand its function and consequences on an audience. The next theory is the muted group theory. This is a critical theory concerning certain groups of people who remain powerless compared to the others. The muted group theory explains the cause of muteness, especially that of women in the society. The theory upholds a gender perspective where the male is the dominant class. When women come to social space, they face the most abusive language because women are considered to be less powerful than men. Men take more advantage by using the existing male dominant power in the social space and protect themselves from abusive language. In our society, most of the abusive language is feminine. Women being stereotyped is also seen in mass media and converted into popular culture. Women are portrayed as a sex symbol in most advertisements, even for male products. The perspective of males towards women has been narrowed down to either sexual or an emotional symbol. Thus, the muted group theory of communication brought to light how communication is affected due to this narrow perspective of the society. The muted group theory can be applied to understand the problems of the marginalized groups. The next and the last theory included in this module is the knowledge gap theory. This theory states that the infusion of mass media information into a social system increases the acquisition of information by the higher socio-economic segments faster than the lower socio-economic segments. This increases the gap in knowledge between the two. The higher economic class gains more benefits. A person of the higher economic class receives more education, which in turn increases his communication skill, and hence gathering information becomes easier for him. Along with this, reading, understanding and memory skills also become better. Thus, he understands the issues of various spheres better. A person with more education has more social integration. This helps him to counter various perspectives with better understanding. If the information services are not made equal for the entire society, this gap of information will increase over the years. Here we end up with the communication theories. Let us summarize this module for, that is, the communication process. In this module, we have learnt about the principles of communication like objectivity, conciseness, clarity, and the knowledge of the audience. We need to follow all these principles of communication if we have to successfully communicate our message to the targeted audience. After this, we have seen the components of communication, and which are very important, that is the sender, the message, the receiver, the message itself, and the feedback, and the medium of communication. These were the components of communication process that we have seen. Next, we came to the process of communication, and lastly 5 important theories which affect communication as a process. Thank you.